Good morning. I'm Carolyn Rye, School Board Chair. Today is Tuesday, January 26th, 2021 at 11:35 a.m. and this begins the School Board's mini retreat. The mini retreat is taking place at the School Administration Building pursuant to the state of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Governor's Orders, the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended by the Virginia General Assembly, and the School Board's April 7th, 2020 emergency resolution. The school board and selected staff will meet in person at the School Administration Building. However, it's impractical and unsafe to allow other persons to attend the school board mini retreat due to physical distancing and safety precautions related to the pandemic. Members of the public will be able to observe this mini retreat through live streaming on vbschools.com, broadcast on VBTV Channel 47, and on Zoom. And we do welcome the viewing and listening public who have chosen to join us today. So, Madam Clerk, if you would now kindly announce those in attendance and participating via Zoom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Present in school board chambers is Chairwoman Rye, Ms. Melnick, Ms. Felton, Ms. Franklin, Ms. Riggs. And attending via Zoom is Ms. Hughes, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Weems, Ms. Owens, and Ms. Holtz.
Thank you. And Mrs. Weems asked me to announce that she's in quarantine due to the imminent birth of a new grandchild. Mrs. Holtz and Ms. Owens are not here due to health reasons, and Mrs. Manning is absent from today's retreat due to a personal conflict. So I'm happy to get us started with our first business of the day, which is our proposed school board protocols manual. And by way of introduction, I just have a few comments and thoughts to share. The proposed school board protocols manual is a collaborative work created by the School Board Governance Committee to assist school board members in understanding their duties and responsibilities. So let's begin with a few definitions. Protocols are defined as a standard set of rules and procedures to be followed for the accomplishment of a given task. Put another way, the rules of a group or the accepted or established code of procedure or behavior in any group or organization. Similarly, norms are closely associated with protocols, agreed upon expectations and rules by which a unifying culture guides the behavior of its members, a standard or pattern, especially of social behavior. So why do these matter? The guidance offered in these pages sends a strong message of our intent as an elected body to model effective school board governance. Among other things, it acknowledges the role we play in running productive, efficient, and legally compliant board meetings, acting as community bridge builders and team members with the superintendent, and setting an example for others. A short history. The original work on this proposed manual began during a previous school board's retreat in 2015. At the time, it was perceived as a resource manual that would serve as a quick go-to guide for school board members. School board approval of a new governance committee in November of 2019 set the stage for renewed interest in such a manual, using the original draft as a starting point. Initial steps in 2020 included committee assessment of issues to consider, whether a proposed protocol was already established, and if not, what potential proposal might be suggested. School Board Council provided at least a dozen sample documents from other districts for reference and consideration. Committee discussion ensued over the course of several months and meetings. By the fall of 2020, the new draft was ready to share with the collective board. Each of you was individually contacted by a governance committee member for discussion and input. Further rewrites ensued, the version in hand today is the most up to date. And finally, a few more points of note before I turn this session over to our two committee presenters. The basic manual maintains the same structure as its predecessor and is organized into three content sections, namely school board member information, school board operating norms, and school board communication protocols. The manual also includes an appendix section to house documents such as our standing rules of order, school board standing rules, special rules of order, standing rules, links to policies and regulations, responsibilities of the school board, and definition of terms. This manual incorporates many existing division policies, bylaws, rules of order, and standing rules. It's worth noting that it's at times more of a conversational guide that aligns with policy rather than a collection of direct excerpts. As this process unfolded, we were challenged in some cases to re-examine what we do. As a result, some written board documents were brought to you for amendment as needed to align with updated manual language. Also included are other division expectations of a long-standing nature, some of which are also updated. The committee membership during this process included recent longtime school board member Dan Edwards, Carolyn Weems, Beverly Anderson, Trinace Riggs, and yours truly. Superintendent Aaron Spence and School Board Counsel Camilla Linetti served as the two staff liaisons. So with that, I now turn to our two committee members who took the lead on this project, Mrs. Anderson and Mrs. Riggs, for their respective manual section overview presentations. Thank you. So Mrs. Riggs and Mrs. Anderson, let us know who is going to start us off.
Miss Anderson is starting us off.
Good morning.
Of the manual. And just so the public knows, you didn't mention this earlier, but I'm out of town on a family matter. So just so they know. This set of protocols is made up of established.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson, if you could speak up a little bit.
Yes. This set of protocols is made up of a set of protocols, established protocols that other school board members across the state have used to help them work together to govern effectively. And so we looked at several examples from other school divisions across the state and nation, and also used some of our own ideas and reasons as well to come up with our own set of school board protocols. So some of the protocols are things that we have not followed well in the past, but moving forward, there will be expectations that we hope our board members will follow, or at least try to adhere to, for the benefit of working together as a collective board. We hope this helps you, as well as future board members, understand our duties and responsibilities as school board members. And I hope all of you have had a chance, all of our board members have had a chance to read through the manual and are already familiar with it. We will try to explain or address any questions you may have as we go through each section today. As you can see on let's start on page 2. It shows that the manual is organized into 3 sections and has appendixes at the end labeled A through F that are designed for quick references for your convenience. Moving on to page 3 and 4, where we have the table of content. And I'm going to start now with a review of starting on page 5. You'll see the beginning of section 1, where it says general and school board member information. At the bottom of page 5, you'll also notice the numbered duties and responsibilities of board members as they continue on with page 6. Please make note, colleagues, that on number 20, we cited the bylaw 1-13 and noted there is also applicable law, which is referred to on page 8, as you will see when we when we're talking about professional development. So while there are many duties and responsibilities of board members, these are the ones deemed most important so they're listed. Are there any questions or comments concerning page 5 or 6 before we move on?
Not about this, but the your voice keeps coming in and out, and I know Laura Hughes and Dottie Holtz, who are also on Zoom, have chatted the same thing. So just to let my colleagues know that we are getting cut off. We can hear some of it, but not all of what you're saying. It keeps cutting in and out. So I just wanted to let everybody know. But we can read it, so it just our responses may be a little bit delayed, I think.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Okay, we noted that. Thank you, ladies.
I hope that my voice will continue to, you'll be able to go do that. So if not, let me know, and I can always switch devices if I have to. So I'm going to move on now to page 5. No, I'm sorry. Moving on to page 7. Is everybody with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to page 7, the chair and vice chair roles are spelled out. You may have noticed we also cited the school board bylaws that correspond, and for the chair and vice chair, it's bylaws 1-9 and 1-18. Are there any questions or comments about this page? Okay, moving on to page 8. You'll see information about the orientation of newly elected school board members. Jennifer, would you like to add your take on orientation, since you were the most recent participant in being oriented to our school board?
Well, I have to tell you, I was very impressed with the process. You definitely put some time and thought into this.
Although I still have a lot to learn, I'm very pleased with with the information I've received so far.
Good, okay. So at the bottom of that page, you will see information about professional development, as I referred to earlier. You'll see that it's part of the Virginia Standards of Quality and the Code of Virginia, which is 22.1-253.13:5, Standard 5, and also our bylaw 1-13 are cited. And this is the explanation for why we have an expectation for professional development of our board members. Any questions or comments before we move to page 9? Okay. Moving on to page 9, you'll see the reference to the Virginia State and Local Governments Conflict of Interest Act. Everyone should be familiar with this, since we're all expected to complete the mandatory training just recently. This page also explains the School Board Governance Committee role in developing our retreats. And at the bottom of the page, there's a paragraph explaining that the Code of Ethics is the guide defining the professional behavior needed to be an effective and responsible school board member. The Governance Committee will be working on developing and implementing a self-monitoring and evaluation tool in the next couple of meetings. Are there any questions or comments on page 9?
Yes, this is Carolyn Weeks. I did raise my hand. I don't know if we're doing the hand raising, but it doesn't appear that we are, so I'll just butt right in.
Go ahead.
The Code of Ethics, I think I brought this up at the governance meeting too. When is, it says annually. I don't think we've been doing that the last 2 years. I can't remember the last time I signed it. So why do we have that it's going to be done every year when we didn't do it this year and we didn't do it last year? Are we going to start doing it annually, or do we do it just every time an election occurs? It says here, but It says annually, so we need to make sure that we're following that if we intend on signing it annually, or if we're not, just sign it every time an election occurs. So what's going on with that?
Yes, Mrs. Wings, and
Last
at the
committee meeting, and this was among the updates that will be in the committee minutes, it was discussed, and there is a plan in place at one of the next two meetings in February to have a re-signing ceremony.
Okay, well, we need to make sure that we do that then every year. Thank you.
thank you for bringing that to everybody's
Right, because
attention.
as I said right, because as I said earlier, some of these protocols are things that we have not really adhered to strictly, but we're hoping after these are adopted that these will be things that we will adhere to in the future. So the next page, let's see, we're on, yeah. The next page starts section 2, and Mrs. Riggs will discuss that section.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. Mrs. Riggs.
Okay, section 2 starts on page 10. And it's called School Board Operating Norms. It covers, it addresses the following topics: parliamentary authority, special rules of order and standing rules, school board meetings, time, place, and order of business, regular meetings, meeting materials for school board members, annual organizational meeting, special meetings and electronic communication meetings, committees, organizations, and boards. And under that, you'll have your committee member assignments, board representation contingency plan, current year committees and boards, election roles and responsibilities of committee chair, agenda planning process, the process and the timelines, addition of topic to school board agenda, agenda process for annual organizational meeting. So it tells you right there what's going to be covered in this section. And this is section, I think, pages 10 through 16. So starting under parliamentary authority, special rules of order, and standing rules is under School Board Bylaw 140. So that covers it. And I'll point out the last sentence in the second paragraph. If you'll look at that last sentence in the second paragraph, the special rules of order may be suspended by a 2/3 vote and may be amended upon meeting the requirements to amend the bylaws. Note in the last paragraph, the last sentence in this section, see bylaw 127. Standing rules may be adopted, amended, or suspended by a 2/3 majority vote of the school board at any time and with no advance notice. And if you've noticed, both Bev and I are pointing out that all of these sections are addressing what they address. They're all supported by our school board bylaws or policies. So you'll see all of that noted in case you want to look it up if you have further questions about it. So it's right there at your fingertips. The special rules of order and standing rules are also found in the back of the manual in appendixes A and B, pages 23 and 24. Okay? Are there any questions about any of this?
How about our Zoom attendees?
Mrs. Williams, do you have a question?
Go ahead.
Madam Clerk, is there a raised hand, or it looks like somebody was trying to?
Miss Owens? She muted herself. Hold on 1 second.
I was stuck on mute, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is the section of the manual where we would bring up questions about the non-agenda speakers, or if that fits in the conversation with the protocols and school board procedures. But I was hoping to bring that up for a quick discussion. It came to my attention yesterday. I know our normal procedure is that non-agenda speakers are not broadcast, and I don't love that, but I understand that that was the norm prior to me. However, in the past, the public had the option of attending the board meetings and being able to hear all of the information that the board members would hear, including the non-agenda speakers if they so chose to attend the meetings. Now, because of the restrictions with coronavirus, that limits the public's ability to come and hear all of the same information that the board is hearing during any given meeting day. And so I wanted to have us perhaps reconsider the broadcast of non-agenda comments, at least during the pandemic phase as well. We're not allowing the general public to be in the chambers.
So if I may first intervene, this is on
12, so I'll defer to Mrs. Riggs on if she wants to jump ahead to this or just pause this question until you get to that point, Mrs. Riggs. What's your preference?
Let's talk about it when we get to that page. We'll move on because it is on page 12. And did Miss Linetti, did you want to say something about that too, please?
I was going to bring some of these issues up in the next section from parliamentary procedure, but I will also point out by law, if you are doing an electronic meeting and individuals cannot come into your building, then they have to be able to see what's happening in the building. So that portion should be broadcast, non-agenda items should be broadcast during an electronic meeting if the public cannot get in here to see it. Otherwise, if the public has the opportunity to come into the building, then you do not have to broadcast it. There's actually no law that says that there's no law that addresses agenda and non-agenda item speakers. But the public has to be able to see it because it's part of the meeting, so they have to be able to see it. If you're not allowing the public to come in for that portion, then you should be broadcasting, or at least in the recording, be able to see those persons that were speaking on non-agenda items. So that's a FOIA question in the sense that the public cannot come in here. So that is your legal question. It's a different question as to whether you're going to broadcast them when the public can actually come in here. You can certainly talk about it here, or we can talk about it in the next section of the retreat.
Well, you know what, if you're up there and you want to talk about it, go ahead. And, if you're there, go ahead and address her question.
And again, Ms. Owens, if you're clear on what I'm saying, the Freedom of Information Act requires that the public be able to observe the meeting. Not that they participate in it, but they can observe the meeting. In a situation where we have here, where we don't have enough space to allow the public in, we're allowing that access to observe through electronic means. So that means non-agenda items should be able to either be heard or broadcast for people, not because we're changing our policy, but because that is how the public is being allowed to observe the meeting. We also record it. It should be recorded, available for the recording later on. But that's one question. Now, the question that I think you're asking is, should we overall change the procedures and allow non-agenda item speakers to always be broadcast? That's a different question. It was changed a number of years ago because what we were finding at that time period was that people were using that ability to broadcast for purposes other than informing the board about what something was going on, and we felt it was encouraging behavior that we didn't necessarily want to see inappropriate comments, commercial advertising, things that normally would not be presented to the board. Not that the board couldn't hear it, but that was encouraging people to use it as free advertising or to publish it. So the decision was the board would hear non-agenda items of individuals, but they would not be broadcast during that time period. And at one point, I'm not clear if they were before the school board meeting, but clearly they were moved to the end of the school board meeting because they were not relevant to what was actually happening on the agenda, and that time was reserved for people who wanted to speak on matters before the agenda. So I don't know if that opens a conversation for you at all.
Okay, so do we want to, would that be something we'd put in the parking lot to talk about more later?
Well, if I understood Mrs. Linetti, you said this is planned in a later presentation from you today?
I was going to bring up some of the issues on speakers because multiple questions have come up on how to handle speakers. So we could take that up later on, which means we might end up having to change the section of the manual depending on what you do. Legally, the question is not whether agenda item individuals get to be broadcast. The question is, can the public have access to what is going on before the board? That's the question.
So I think we can proceed with the manual now, and Ms. Owens with the presentation, with the expectation that this matter will be taken up in the afternoon session of the retreat. Okay?
That sounds fine to me. Just for quick clarification, I know that Cammie said that because of the pandemic, yes, that information needs to be available. Are we currently broadcasting or including that on our links?
Can you clarify the
Question?
question?
I'm not sure I understood.
Sure. For our non-agenda speakers, since we've started the COVID meetings, are the non-agenda speakers included on the public links for our meetings as of now, or as of how we've been doing it?
You mean if you go to the website
And view the recording of the meeting? They're not, we're looking for a response. I think we need staff to help with that.
I don't know if it's recorded or broadcast. I can't.
Why don't we incorporate that in our Dr. Spence?
He said, no, he did not
I
think
was
so.
being asked if it is. The answer is I don't think it is.
Right. So we will incorporate that in the afternoon discussion.
Okay. So
Thank you.
thanks for the questions, Jessica. We'll find out the answers to them and talk about them.
Okay, we will proceed.
Okay, so that was page 10. Now, let's go to page 11. Regular meetings.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Mhm.
Mrs. Hughes is in the queue, and I wasn't sure if it
Oh,
was
I'm
about this matter.
Mrs. Hughes?
Well, yeah, it is about
This matter, but I think I can put in my 2 cents in 30 seconds since we've already discussed for 10 minutes that we're not going to discuss it. I do think that our non-agenda speakers should be broadcast the same as agenda speakers. However, any speaker, agenda or non-agenda, well, agenda would obviously default to it, but any speaker should clearly be limited to school board business, and they should know ahead of time they cannot advertise, and they just need to be asked to stop speaking if it's not school board business or if it is just self-promotion. So.
Clear, the decision was made to defer further discussion until the parliamentary portion of the retreat. Okay, Mrs. Riggs.
Okay, so on starting at the bottom of page 10 and moving on to 11, you've got school board meetings, time, place, and order of business, regular meetings. It includes unauthorized meetings, regular meetings, and then the closed meetings. The procedures and rules are covered, as you can see, in bylaw 136. And in the last paragraph, and does anybody have any questions or comments on this page, 10 and 11, the bottom of 10 or 11? Okay, so let's go to page.
Let's be sure, Madam Clerk, any Zoom questions?
No one has a raised hand.
Okay.
Okay, so on page 12, the next, to the last sentence, on page 12, closed meetings. Okay.
Wait, closed meetings
Yeah,
is page 11?
it's page 11. Okay. But it extends over to page 12, so it's the first paragraph on page 12, okay? And it's the next to the last sentence, starting with unless. Unless otherwise authorized, school board members should not keep personal notes or copies of materials that are provided for or in closed session. Note, the PRC's recommendation of the amendment to this section of the bylaw, closed meetings B3, will be voted on in tonight's school board meeting. Are there any questions or concerns on either of these two pages or with what I just said?
Ms. Ranks, I just want to clarify. So did you, when you say that we're going to further discuss, so you want all comments to be deferred until that discussion?
Not tonight, because tonight, remember, we were supposed to be voting on bylaw 136 and what was the other one? Bylaw 128. Anyway, at the last meeting, and we deferred them to this meeting because of time.
Sure.
So tonight, we are voting to pass them.
Just those two.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Well, they go along with, yeah, it's just those two. We've got information on the other policies. You'll see it in your agenda, okay?
Okay.
But if you have a question or concern about what I just said or anything on this closed meetings and what I just pointed out, now's the time to talk.
Oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to just mention that I kind of agree with Ms. Manning in the sense, I mean, I don't know about you all, but when I write notes, it's important for me to remember because, of course, we all have many things going on in our lives as well. And I guess just the concern is that we can't maintain those notes for future meetings. Can we clarify on what that means specifically? Does that mean we can't?
Well, you can keep them, but they need to probably be put with the clerk because of these are all they're closed meeting, and also we're also talking about the discipline meetings. That's all personal information about the students, and so you can't. It's confidential.
Sure.
You can't keep that. So I'm gonna let Cammie speak on it more. So if you can,
And then if I could just say one other thing, and then maybe you can speak on that. So, are we able? And I apologize for my ignorance in this
No.
matter, but are we able to have folders that the clerk would maintain so that while we're in school board headquarters, that we have the ability to refer back to those notes?
That's the second
Oh, I'm sorry.
sentence that Mrs. Riggs did not read aloud.
Yeah, I mean,
Such
OS
documents should be provided to the clerk of the board or school board legal counsel to assure compliance with Virginia Public Records Act, with the assumption that they would be available to you upon need.
Yeah, if you wanted to refer to them, you just, go ask the clerk, and she'll have them in a place, that they're secure. So, is that answering it and satisfying? Okay, thanks, Jennifer.
Mrs. Weems? Mrs. Weems is in the queue?
Yes, please.
We'll add you, Mrs. Anderson, after Mrs. Weems. Thank you.
Yes, thank people that I spoke with. Yeah, I don't see, I mean, I take notes, like Trinae said, in discipline hearings, I keep it in a notebook. It comes home with me and it's in my school board desk drawer cabinet. So I really don't see any problem with that because I have always kept them confidential and I don't intend not to. So my question for Cammie, or maybe Trinae or Beverly, you know this, legally with the legal jargon, what is the difference between shall, should, must, and would? So in this one, it says should. Does that mean that you will, or does shall mean you have discretion? Legally, what is the difference? Because some places it's should and some it's shall, some it's must. So what is the difference there?
This is an issue with the courts as to whether shall is mandatory or not. Generally, it's presumed it's mandatory that you understand the meaning of the words you put in, and must would be discretionary. I mean, should is discretionary, shall is absolute, must is probably absolute. You should be doing that, but you can define those words on there. I can tell you how the courts would do it, but I will tell you the courts often switch on this particular matter. Shall generally indicates that you will, but there could be reasons why you wouldn't. So it's not that easy a question. What I will point out in this, there are a couple things that are happening in this area. Overriding is records that you create in your capacity as an elected official are public records. And they're public records. First of all, they're subject to the Virginia Public Records Act, which means you have to maintain them for a certain period of time. Library of Virginia sets forth certain schedules. There's a public education, there's public schools schedule, there's also one on government. All the different types of documents that you could create are listed on the schedule, and that tells you how long you can keep them. For example, if you're keeping field trip notes, you can get rid of that at the end of the year. If you're keeping certain types of notes, if you're keeping a child's cumulative record, that must be kept 75 years after the child leaves the school division. There are rules of that nature. For the most part, for regular school board members, you are required to maintain them for 3 years. Chair's documents are required to maintain forever. That's why we usually go to the clerk. So you've got the Public Records Act. So if somebody were to request those records, we have to be able to go in and get those records to begin with. So that applies to any records, whether it's confidential or not. The concern has been, if I'm correct, and you can, Mrs. Riggs and Mrs. Anderson can correct me, was that some matters, particularly in closed session, are confidential, particularly with students, which has federal implications, both federal and state implications, as to where those records have to be kept and how they have to be kept. There are employee records that don't have quite federal, but they could sometimes have federal records. There's also litigation matters that once released from confidentiality, I can't protect those records from having to be turned over. The other records that have made public would then be subject to FOIA. So knowing where those records are and how to maintain them are very important to us because we have to access to them. So if, let's say you're doing a student discipline matter, that is subject to Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. That's a federal law, the Buckley Amendment, which says you have to protect the confidentiality of a student's records, which means we have to maintain them, we have to know where they are, and if requested, the student has to be able to get access to them. There are some exceptions. Generally for teachers, if you are the only one that is maintaining that record, you don't share it with anybody else other than the substitute who's filling in for you, that it does not become an education record. It is not that clear that that applies to school board members because you're not actually the teacher. But they have a right to, one, subpoena them or to at least FOIA those records. So I would need to be able to get access to those records. Also, if we were requested to show how you are maintaining the confidentiality of those records, it would be hard for me to say that because I don't know what you have at your home, Mrs. Weems. I don't know what somebody else is carrying around the back of their car at that point. I could not necessarily guarantee to a student or someone who is otherwise entitled to confidentiality of those records that they could do that. There's another law, the Virginia Government Data Collection and Dissemination Practices Act, also says if I'm a citizen, I'm allowed to come to the government, I'm allowed to know exactly what records you have on me, and I have to be able to look at them so I can know what the government has, and you can challenge those records. So if somebody would come to me and I didn't know you had those records in your file, it would be hard for me to know, to tell them, and we could be in non-compliance, which is why we try to make sure we know where your records are. Again, I don't check all your records because you have a lot of records that you receive. For the most part, you're receiving copies, in which case the main copy is being maintained by the clerk or by the chair. That doesn't worry me in particular, but anything you get directly that may not be available to the entire board, that might become a person's record, and we would need to be able to access it, and we would have to be able to show that we maintain confidentiality of it. That's why we were discussing these issues, because we don't want these things inadvertently being out in the community. And obviously, there are pretty severe consequences if you were to violate a student's rights, and it doesn't happen very often, but if you were violating a student's rights and confidentiality of records, the federal government could come in and they could access your funding or deny you funding if you didn't have adequate protection in place for a student's records. It really doesn't happen that often, but that's the underlying concerns that we have. Day to day, what we normally see is a FOIA request to see the records or Government Data Collection Act request or a FERPA request. I want to see what records you have on me. We would need to be able to access them. I'm more concerned in a litigation situation that you may have released a confidential document that I can no longer protect under attorney-client privilege anyway because it accidentally got out, and now I have to turn it over to the other side. So that is something we do in litigation sometimes is we come into closed session, describe to you what's going on and make some decisions about litigation. If it is shared outside of the protected class, it loses its protections, and that's where I get concerned because if I get questioned on that, I may have to turn that document over, which may be detrimental to our case. So those are background things that we talk about confidentiality. There is no actual law that said it has to be kept in a certain place. I think these school board members that were working on this were concerned enough that we protect the confidentiality of those records. So that's just your legal background as to how you want to handle this. That'll be up to you to make that decision.
Okay, thank you. And Cammie? Next time you speak, can you try to speak a little bit closer to the microphone and slow down a little bit? It's hard to understand everything that you're saying via the screen for the Zoom people folks. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mrs. Riggs and then Mrs. Anderson, did you meet?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
Yeah,
so
Mrs.
go ahead,
Anderson.
Mrs. Anderson.
I mean, I was able to hear Cammie and I understood everything she was saying. I tend to think, you know, as a teacher, all the years that I taught, I was very careful about maintaining confidentiality, especially about students' cumulative records. And I treat the confidentiality of our discipline meetings the same way as I would the cumulative records of any student that I've taught. So that's why it's so important. And I think Cammie explained it very carefully in that, you know, if a student ever wants to know anything that's written about them, she needs to be able to put her hands on anything that we have concerning that student. And so that's why we thought it might be better for our clerk to keep any notebooks, anything that's written in notebooks, just tear out the pages. She could make a file for that particular student and then link it to your name so that if you have to, I think Miss Manning had indicated that she likes to refer back to her notes if a student comes back for discipline. So if that happens, our clerk would be able to get her hands on, or Cammie could get her hands on those particular records at any time if they're maintained in the clerk's office, you know, on a file. So that is the whole purpose of that, and it eliminates the possibility of anybody taking confidential information of students out of our building after we've had discipline meetings, or even confidentiality from any closed session that we've had. It has to do with even if we've had a closed session, you know, about one of our employees, the same thing. The same confidentiality has to apply. So if you have notes, they need to be maintained in our clerk's office so that we can so that Cammie can get her hands on them if there's further litigation. I hope that clears it up.
Okay.
Lynn. So I just want to clarify, just for me. So if we're just talking about the closed session notes, correct? So open session, we're fine. And do we have a sense of priority? Like in the military, they have top secret documents. Obviously, those have to be kept at the facility. Do we have any kind of order of priority in terms of if it has to do with discipline or students, teachers? Like those are the topics that have to be. Is there some kind of flag that you know that you're not, because obviously none of us want to get in trouble, you know, with FOIA at any point. So I just am curious if there's something available that will prioritize subject matter and tell you that specifically needs to be kept here on.
You don't have that in particular. I would probably, obviously student discipline, because it's a federal, student records at all, because the federal law controls that, that's going to be primary for you. FERPA is probably one of the major laws that we deal with in education. So FERPA would, a student, anything doing with the student, a particular student, that you can identify the student, that would be probably something you have to protect. Employee records, it has to do with, there's actually no federal law or state law that says you have to protect employee records unless you're dealing with medical records or ADA or HIPAA requirements that you have access to those records. That would have to be protected. Or if you know something about a criminal matter, there's certain laws that might apply to that. You have a policy, however, that says you will maintain the confidentiality of that as long as the employee isn't out there. You're not otherwise required to do that. In a litigation section, a matter, it would depend on the litigation matter, and I would tell you what needed to be maintained confidential or not at that point. So other than that, you don't have it. We could come up with a list to help you understand, but you don't have anything in your bylaws, your policies that defines the order of priority in protecting confidentiality.
But usually, Cammie's in all of our closed sessions are one of her, the people lawyers that works with her in our discipline. So they remind us, you know, and say something to us about it as well. Very much.
So if I can wrap this up for now, it seems whatever action is taken by the school board in tonight's formal session will determine whether or not this section of the manual needs revision. So we can move on.
Yes.
And thank you all for your questions. Okay,
I've actually had my hand up for quite some time. Can I say something?
please.
I don't have any problem returning materials that are passed out, but I do plan on keeping my own notes. And as Mrs. Anderson pointed out, when she was a teacher, we have a couple of other teachers, former teachers, who, you know, they understood protecting confidentiality. Miss Franklin works in an industry where she has to protect confidentiality, as do I. And I mean, and several others. Miss Manning has worked in one. Actually, she does now, where she has to protect certain confidentiality. I don't think I know of any issues where any of this private information has gotten out by school board members who have kept their information. But additionally, the rationale that, you know, Miss Linetti may have to put something together for someone who's asking, it is no more cumbersome for her to ask me for my notes on a student than it would be for me to ask her for my notes on a student. So I will be keeping my personal notes and I will be keeping them confidential.
Okay.
I think that covers all the speakers. And Mrs. Riggs, if you would kindly proceed.
Okay, so we're on page 12, meeting materials for school board members. We all know that we have agenda planning. You'll see down there, you know, agenda items, sufficient time to get
on the agenda planning committee.
We now put the word committee on that, and it was just usually called agenda planning, but it's a committee, you know, now. So like I'm on the agenda planning committee with Carolyn for tomorrow and Dr. Spence for the next agenda. So I just wanted to point that out. And then we're going to move on to page 13. You've got officers' elections in terms of office, and then page 13, your annual organizational meeting, special meetings, electronic meetings, and remote participation in meetings, which are covered also under Bylaw 136. What I want to point out on this page is note that the PRC's recommendation of the amendment of this section of the bylaw, closed meetings, it'll be closed meetings tonight, D1C, on our agenda. It'll be voted on in tonight's school board meeting. And if you want to look at that and check it out about the remote meetings, talking about if we can ask our get up with our chair and say we need to do this closed meeting remotely. I know there were some questions about that as well. So we've added that, and that was in the bylaw that we were going to vote on again tonight. That was another section that was questioned. So I will open that and see if there's anybody else that has any, or anybody has any questions on that. You see anybody?
Anybody Zoom? Okay.
No.
Okay, so if you want to review that, the remote participation, look at that last paragraph. You know, certain procedures, I'm starting right in the middle, must be followed to participate remotely, and there may be limits on the number of times a school board member can participate remotely. School board members should not assume that they can participate remotely in a meeting without first discussing this with the school board chair or the committee chair. Appropriate prior notice is required to participate remotely. Additionally, failure of a quorum of the public body members to meet in one location could prevent the meeting from going forward. Kimmy?
Ms. Riggs, I just want to clarify, also on tonight's agenda, under B, 12B1 is bylaw 136, and we've explained it before, it's gotten delayed on voting on, but the full explanation, if you have agenda policy, if you want to understand, they're in your agenda package today, and that's where it's spelled out fully.
Thank you.
And Mrs. Linetti, while you're at the podium, and for Mrs. Riggs, I think it bears pointing out, this is separate from the current pandemic meetings. This is intended to cover, I mean, some of it overlaps, but this language, because when you talk about limits, obviously we haven't had member limits during this pandemic because of the emergency resolution. So try to keep the 2 points separate for clarity purposes, that these are just, generally speaking, in a post-pandemic world, will revert back, and it's been greatly expanded to clarify when members can participate remotely and how frequently. And
I can give you back. The concept is, the state has allowed electronic meetings for a long time, but there's a general concept that the public should be able to go to see its local government in action, have access to it. So they did not allow electronic meetings where more than a quorum of the members of that body were not present, where the people could see them. It's just been a philosophy for a long time in Virginia that the citizens should be able to come in and observe. That obviously has had to change in the pandemic. Prior to adopting some of these, you were allowed to do it. A hurricane was coming, there was something we had to do, and you just couldn't get in here together. For the purposes of that emergency, you were allowed to meet. That changed when the budget amendments came out last year, and they allowed this change to FOIA because obviously we didn't know when we would be able to meet. You need to keep an eye on what's going on in the General Assembly, and then Mrs. Melnick can address this, but the Legislative Committee actually proposed language to VSBA that we expand the use of electronic meetings because it's become so common. Those bills are being kicked around. A lot of issues on electronic meetings are being looked at the General Assembly. So that may change, that may open up for you in the future using it or portions. So that's electronic meeting. Again, separated from remote participation means less than a quorum of people cannot come into the meeting. It's different than when more of you are not here. It means I'm out of town, I'm sick, I can't come in. That's remote participation. I don't think that will change in the General Assembly, but I do think you may see some changes for electronic meetings just because so many people have become comfortable with doing them, and it does allow more access. So whatever you adopt here may end up changing as a result of what goes to the General Assembly, and keep an eye on that. So I can pose that out there. Just remember that we're not totally responsible for the final decision on this.
thank you.
Thank you, Cammie. Okay, so we're going to go on to page 14 and 15. And on page 14 and 15, you're going to have committees, organizations, and boards, committee member assignments and committees, organizations and assignment changes or appointments of alternates, which are covered also under our School Board Bylaw 128. And you see it right there on the page. So, any questions on page 14?
Are we good, Madam Clerk?
Miss Weems has her hand raised.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Weems.
Thank you. I mentioned this in our governance committees, so, and it didn't get much support, but I'm going to mention it for everybody else to hear. In item 2, responsibilities of the chair, it says, of course, the chair recommends committees, and then she presents them. She and the vice chair together present them to the board, and we vote on. So, and I'm fine with that. I just don't think there needs to be any of the 1 through 9. It's listed on my page on 14. Any of the reasons or how you come about it. I just think, because in the past there's been, whether it's true or not, perception by many that these criteria have not been followed. And I'm not here to debate that, but what I will say is the chair and the vice chair get to come up with a slate and we get to vote on it. So I really don't need I don't see the need for 1 through 9, all that other stuff in there. I would just like the chair and the vice chair to do it, present it to us, and we'll vote on it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And that, Mrs. Weems, can be raised again in the formal meeting when this comes up as an action item. Mrs.
Mrs.
Linetti?
Williams, just for your, bylaw 128, which deals with committees, organization boards, is also on tonight's agenda.
Yes.
Those criteria are listed there, so that would be another time to look at it as an agenda. And, I mean, you could do it now, but also remember, you will be formally voting on it tonight. Not that you can't bring up the bylaw at another time, but if you wanted to, tonight it's actually up for another reason, but you could amend it there also.
So that gives,
Correct, that is bylaw, so it would need a bylaw change. Yes, correct.
But that bylaw is actually on tonight's
Right.
anyway, so if you want to take a look at it and you want to propose that change, you could make an amendment to that bylaw tonight also, or we can look at it another time.
right. And I brought it up to just, again, to reiterate that gives members time to consider your comments, Mrs. Weems. Thank you. Okay, Mrs. Riggs.
Okay. So continuing on page 15, I was going to mention that, but since we've already discussed it, that's fine. So, Cammie, let you know that, that's one of the other bylaws that we'll be voting on that we were supposed to at the last meeting, and we put off till tonight. Finally, in section 2 on pages 15 and 16, we have agenda planning process, the process and timelines, procedures for clarification of specific agenda items, addition of topics to the agenda, and agenda process for annual organizational meeting. These are covered under bylaw 139, which you see referenced right under the titles. And are there any questions for any of those sections on page 15 and 16?
Madam Clerk?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Okay, so that is section 2, and Bev will have section 3.
So, Mrs. Anderson, if I may, just to do a time check, we're at 12:30, and we have this manual session scheduled up until about 1 o'clock with Mrs. Bannicky in the queue. So with that, we welcome you back, and we're here to hear your overview of the final section.
Actually, I thought I was supposed to start on page 19, but I can start on 17 if Ms. Riggs is not prepared to do that at this time. So it's just on page.
Well, why don't you just
Riggs,
go
are you
ahead with,
prepared to do?
Really isn't.
Riggs, are you prepared? I was supposed to start on school visits, but do you have notes to prepared for 17 through 19? That's
Well-
okay, I can go on with you.
Section 3 on page 17.
Right.
And I
Okay,
finished.
it's all right. Okay. Okay, I just thought we talked about it, but that's okay. So on page 17, let me just put this like this. So, it talks about on section 3, starts off with the school board and the superintendent. And then, starting on page 18, it continues responding to constituents' concerns. And the biggest thing here is we want to make sure that people understand that really and truly, I believe it's on the paragraph, somewhere here, it talks about the superintendent is the main spokesman for the school board or maybe this is constituent concerns. I think this talks about how the school board chair answers on behalf of the board. And then how to respond is on page 18 as well. When we want we're on the, I think it's the next to the last paragraph at the bottom. I have that underlined. It says, under no circumstances should a school board member promise a certain outcome for a constituent to attempt to influence the superintendent or staff for the purpose of achieving a certain result for the constituent. Instead, the school board member's response should acknowledge the communication and inform the constituent that the concern will be forwarded to the appropriate staff for follow-up. So it's just how we respond to constituent concerns. So are there any questions on page 18?
Ms. Weems has her hand raised. Go ahead, Mrs. Weems.
Okay, yes, how to respond, the paragraph under that title, as a courtesy and to avoid multiple or conflicting responses, all school board members and the superintendent or designee should be copied on a response to a constituent. I don't do that all the time, and I know that it's not being done because I'll get emails. We'll get emails constantly from a constituent saying, only 3 of you have responded to me, and the only response I get copied on is Carolyn Rise. I don't think it's rude not to copy all of y'all. If I need the superintendent to hear the constituent concern, I will email the superintendent, and then I will also respond and copy him on my response. But I don't think so. So I'm assuming you put as a courtesy that we don't have to, because I don't necessarily want every response that Ms. Owens responds to everybody who she knows, because she might have a different relationship with some of her constituents, and I don't really need a response to all that, or I don't need a response to everyone that Vicki Manning sends out. So I don't really agree that we need to copy, because it's not happening, and it never has, except for with Carolyn Rye. So I'm going to continue conducting business as always the way I deem appropriate. I don't think I'm being rude to not copy all of y'all on every single response I have to people.
Right, and that's why we put in the word courtesy and to avoid conflicting responses. And we said should, we didn't say must, we didn't say shall, we said should. So if you don't, you don't. It's just a common courtesy thing. Yes?
May I suggest replacing may or can be copied? You do introduce it with that as a courtesy, but then avoid the word should later on in the sentence and say may be copied instead of should. Because, I concur with Mrs. Weems in terms of, okay.
I agree to that. So Tammy, can you make those changes?
Ms. Hughes has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Ms. Hughes.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Weems, and it sounds like you're already changing it anyway. I don't think it needs to be in there at all. There are times when I copy, who I feel needs to be copied. There are times when I don't copy anybody. I deem what's appropriate, who's appropriate to include in my emails. The only time I think that you absolutely should copy everybody is if you're responding on behalf of the board. Clearly, you should copy the whole board. And again, we've discussed before that responding on behalf of the board is very limited. It's factual. So I hope that will continue.
Okay. Mrs. Felton?
The only problem I can see that this creates is that, and it can go both ways. Conflicting beliefs, conflicting ideas. It's like you're debating everything within the public, and so there's up or down, of this.
Why don't we put this off to our facilitation point in the session with Dr. Bannicky, if I may suggest that, because we are running out of time.
And that was my suggestion as well, because I wanted to make sure that we're understanding the changes we're making. That's all. Thank you. I just
Okay.
want to, this is Sharon Felton, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Chair Rye.
So, all right, any other comments about that part of it? So starting on,
Yes, if you could try to wrap up these
5
next part.
pages in the next 5 minutes, and then we'll call Dr. Babaniki to the podium.
at the bottom, so starting on page 19, school visits. For the school visits part, I think we all understand that it's common courtesy to contact the principal prior to scheduling a visit, but it's spelled out in this part of the manual. And further explanation about school visits continues on page 20. And so on page 20, please note that any concerns observed during your visit should be addressed with the superintendent and not directly with the school personnel. Dr. Spence or his designee will address those issues and will provide a follow-up response to you. The school board and the media section start at the bottom of page 20, and the policy 7-6 is noted. The first line of that section explains that the superintendent will serve as the primary spokesperson for the school division in dealing with the public and media. Following up on page 21, please take note about the free informational items concerning the media at the top of the page. And also, there are 5 bullets concerning matters that we're not authorized to discuss. Please feel free to use the disclaimer that we've included on this page. We put it there and suggest that you use it or something similar to it. However, it's there for you to copy on your social media page if you'd like to use it. The next item mentioned on this page is the use of school email and communication systems. We are provided as a school system email account as well as the group email account so that constituents can address the board as a whole. For our school system email, I have to thank Dr. Spence, because for those of you who are new, before he started working as our superintendent, we didn't have a school system email. We had to use our personal email for board business. It wasn't appropriate for board members to have to use their personal email to communicate with constituents or to conduct board business. But after Dr. Spence was hired, he realized right away that the board needed a school system email account, and he made that happen. I felt like the board at that point in time had finally moved into the 21st century. So moving on, are there any questions so far? Moving on to page 22, the Freedom of Information Act is explained.
Anderson, I'm sorry,
as it
Ms.
pertains-
Weems just put her hand up.
Okay, Ms. Weems?
Yes,
Go ahead.
Beverly, when I was polling my folks on behalf of the governance committee, Ms. Manning did make a suggestion, and I do agree with it, to be consistent on the paragraph under school board members and social media. Instead of school board members should attach the following, because should means they must. I think you should say exactly what you just said. It is suggested that school board members attach the following.
Okay. So we can make that change.
Thank you.
Like I said, that disclaimer is there for your use. You can
Yeah, and
choose
she
to
agrees
do
with it.
or do
Yeah, she
something
agrees
similar.
with it. It just, yeah, if we just change that. Thank you.
Yeah, we made a note. Thank you, Mrs. Weems.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on page 22, the Freedom of Information Act is explained as it pertains to emails and other forms of communication. It goes on to explain that any form of written or electronic communication can be construed as public record and can be FOIA'd. Therefore, the school board members are discouraged from using their personal emails for school board business. Of course, we have to maintain our emails for 3 years from the date of receipt. But when we're using the school system email, that's all kept for us and can be retrieved. So it makes it a little easier on us. The last line at the top under emails and other communications, Virginia Freedom of Information Act reminds us that confidential information should not be conveyed through electronic communication, because obviously that can be FOIA'd. At the bottom of page 22, we're reminded that school board members' requests for information should be submitted to the superintendent, who will then forward that request to the appropriate staff member for additional research. We need to remember that our staff does not work directly for us. but does work directly for the superintendent, and he should be the one to direct their work. The rest of the manual is appendixes. Appendix A being the school board special rules of order, our school board bylaws. Appendix B is our standing rules. Appendix C shows links to policies and regulations. Appendix D is the code of ethical and professional conduct. Appendix E has definition of terms used throughout the manual, and Appendix F explains school board committee procedures and any further any other things that we might need to know. So these appendixes are just there for our, so that we can get to those questions you might have, frequent questions quickly. So any further discussion or questions?
Beth, I have a couple of, actually, we can hold edits. You want me to do it now or wait?
We'll go with
We'll go with Dr. Bannick.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead.
Actually, Ms. Williams has her hand raised.
Mrs. Williams, we have Dr. Bannicky set to go, but go ahead, please.
Well, this isn't probably the time to discuss it, but I would like to put it out there for my colleagues. In the helpful hints for a successful school visit, I hope that we revisit this because lately, but even before COVID, I think we need to reevaluate how successful and the purpose of our school visits are. We did them quite differently years ago when we had a form to fill out. I would like to kind of rediscuss that and reevaluate that whole process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Duly noted.
Okay, Dr. Bannicky, welcome. Well, just that you've heard the overview and some of the comments or questions that arose.
Is it on now? Well, the challenge, thank you very much.
So
Thank you.
we're looking to you to help us with how we assess all this and next step. So
Right.
please.
So in meeting with Mrs. Rye in advance and preparing for this retreat, she and members of the governance committee really wanted you to have an opportunity to discuss in detail this protocol, make sure that there was space for providing feedback. And they did that by sharing it out in advance, but also creating this time on the agenda. I have a protocol, but our time is a little bit shorter than I had anticipated. But first, just as a brief, you have a handout. I just want to refer to this handout and tell you why I gave it to you.
And let me stop you a moment. We can certainly go over about, we've cushioned in some time
Okay.
with parliamentary, so we can go over 10 minutes.
Okay, so I needed you to say that, not me to shove into 10 minutes, so thank you for that. On the handout, I would not be a facilitator worth my salt if I didn't come with some sort of norms for the way we meet with one another. And so what I shared with you are on your handout, and this was also emailed to the people who are there via Zoom. Hello, everyone, I can't see you, and this is very awkward to facilitate, but hello. I can't see you, but hello. I have my ABC norms. I use these norms in a lot of the meetings I facilitate because they're pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Assume good intentions, be present and prepared, communicate with candor and curiosity. I just want to say just one quick thing about that. Candor, I think we all know what candor means, and I don't know that anyone in the room has a problem with candor. I don't think anyone has a problem with curiosity either, but I thought it was interesting in some reading I've done about this idea of saying what your thoughts are, but also staying curious about perspectives of others when engaging in these kind of conversations. And on the back, I have a little mini book report on a book that I read about this idea of candor and curiosity that I always give out when I give out the norms. So you have a two-sided handout. That's all that is. I'm not providing a lecture on a book or a book talk, but I found it interesting. I thought I'd recommend it. What we're going to do is something where I'm going to give you an opportunity to provide feedback by using something called the Fist of Five polling. So my caveat, or what I want to say from the beginning, is this is not a formal vote on the protocol. It's just providing you a room or space to respond to the protocol manual as a whole. And what we're going to do here in a moment is I'm going to ask you, as you think about the protocol manual, to provide your rating or your polling on the manual. So you see on the slide here and on the handout, if you are very pleased with this and fully support it, you'd give it 5 fingers. If you're mostly satisfied with this and you can support it, you'd give it 4 fingers. If you can accept it, but you have some reservations, you'd give it 3 fingers. If you think it needs revisions, and I did hear that there were some suggested revisions, and we can capture that as part of the conversation as well, or I plan to, you would give it 2 fingers. And one is that you're just not accepting the protocol manual at all, right? And there'd be an opportunity to share where that's coming from as well. Some key things I heard when I was listening to your presentation was The protocol manual being something to drive the way you do your business. A recognition that there may have been times in the past where some portions of it have not been implemented, like, for example, the signing of the ethics piece annually. And then I also heard there were some revisions. There are also some things that you'll be talking about later today, that policy or bylaw. I'll have to defer to Cammie or to one of you about the specifics because I haven't memorized your manual, or nor can I speak to all your bylaws. So with that, what I'm going to do is just give you an opportunity to vote. I guess the people who are on Zoom, are you able to see chat?
Yes.
So I don't know if it's going to, I think if we all try to talk at once, it might be too much. So if, for those of you on Zoom, if you could use the numbers 1 through 5 to indicate where you stand, I'm going to record it. I'm going to step away from the mic and record it somewhere else while the people in the room give me their 1 to 5 vote as well. I'm going to do that now. I'm going to try to talk really loud when I move to the side. If I have to turn a mic on near me, I'll do that. Okay?
And this is barring the Scrivener changes, just those few little words.
Yes, I would say hold, the challenge here is when you're adopting something as much as the protocol manual, to not get into the weeds of every,
Okay.
yeah. So, when I get to my board, did you know this was here? No. Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm gonna start with Mrs. Riggs. I'm gonna ask you to give me your rating so I can make a mark for it.
For the entire,
Overall, yeah, what rating would you give? This is just a poll. Okay. Mrs. Felton? Mrs. Rye? Mrs. Melnick?
Madam Chair, we probably need to pause for just 1 second and see if we can't get her a handheld mic because she cannot be heard on the stream. Sorry, Dr. Bannicky. I'm actually a little nervous about giving you a microphone, but there might be.
Am I on? Oh,
You
hello.
are, thank
Yes,
you.
well, I'm sorry. Now I have a mic. Now you're in trouble. All right, so I just did Mrs. Franklin. So Jennifer Franklin, you're new, and I'm still learning your name, but I give myself credit. Okay. So now we have people who are available on Zoom.
Okay, Miss Anderson, rated a 5.
Okay.
Miss Owens, rated a 3.
Okay.
Miss Hughes, rated a 2.
All right.
And if Miss Weems and Miss Holtz can put theirs in the chat.
Yeah, I tried to do that, and for some reason, I'm not very smart about this, but I'm rating it a 3.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Holtz?
Number 5.
Thank you.
Okay. So one of the things I meant to say when I started and introduced the polling is I hope you'll notice that on this polling, this 1 to 5 polling, ratings of 3 or higher are really agreement ratings. There's just varying gradients of agreement. And 1 and 2 are disagreements that would need to be further discussed. So depending on how it fell out was going to be how I facilitated this. I think what I'd like to do is what I'm doing here is helping to provide space to have discussion around what some of the reservations may be, and also capture what some suggested revisions may be. So what I'd like to start with is reservations. So we had 2 board members who gave a rating of 3, but had at least one reservation that they wanted to, that they noted. And that would be, Mrs. Weems. I thought it was I'm reading it upside down like it's an M. Mrs. Weems and Mrs. Owens. So Mrs. Owens or Mrs. Weems, if one of you would like to share what your reservation is about the protocol manual, I'd like to record that on one of our large white sheets.
Ms. Weems, you want to go first? Doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, I kind of stated areas that I had concerns with already, just with, the code of ethics and some instances, I think that it should be suggested but not mandated that we do certain things. Let's see, the whole thing about the committee appointments, the school visit part. So, I mean, everything I kind of suggested, you know, when I brought up my areas of concern during the discussion.
I did hear those, and I made notes on my document, knowing that also your colleagues are
Notes on
making
those.
notes on.
At least some of these are, the code of ethics was under the category, I think, of how it's been applied in the past and how it'll be applied moving forward. There were areas, I did capture areas where, as a courtesy, there'd be changed to that area that talked as a courtesy how communications would be handled, and changing the language in that to reflect not so much should as fitting the as a courtesy. With the committee appointments, I heard the recommendation that it not have a bulleted list of how they're made, just that they come from the chair. And I know that's something you'll talk about further, because I think that's one of the items that's later tonight. So.
And then copy and constituents. That was an area that we can discuss later tonight too, with that bylaw, I think.
And
So-
if it were not the case that you were going to have this on your agenda later tonight, we would have a more full discussion. So let me tell you how I would handle this if I knew you weren't having it later in your meeting. You would share your reservations, and then I would provide an opportunity for any of your colleagues to respond, either typically not, I'd ask someone who to respond who has a different perspective on the reservation or something they wanted to say in response to the reservation. But given the time, and I know that it's something that's on your agenda later, I don't intend to do that unless anyone wants to take issue with that and let me know that before I move on to Mrs. Owen's reservations.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Rye? Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Owens, Mrs. Rye had her hand up for just one moment. Would you mind if I fielded her question? It's a little, thank you.
Right, it's just a follow-up to
the school visit. So, there's, as I see it, that there's nothing in this manual that precludes us
taking a next step and reassessing the process, Mrs. Weems. So, so that's why I'm comfortable with this wording, with the understanding that the greater purpose of the meaning of those visits, you know, and if it turns out in the future it would warrant manual rewording, but I just think it's related, but in my view, I'm just comfortable that the manual allows for that process and that discussion to flow from this. So that was my only point there.
Thank you. Mrs. Owens?
Okay, and that was helpful that Ms. Rice spoke first. I am also interested in just having some more discussion and perhaps looking at the school visit portion. The other two places where I'd like to, I don't know, see more discussion, the comments on the non-agenda items that I mentioned in the beginning. I do feel like for transparency purposes, the public should be able to know any information that we as a board receive during board meetings, whether it was on agenda topics or not on agenda topics. It's information that was brought to us, and for transparency, they should have the right to hear anything that we've heard. And then my third one, I will start out by saying I understand the reasoning behind the wanting to have the notes from the closed sessions, et cetera. I think, though, that where we are in technology, where we are, has to catch up, and that in a society where we do lots of teleworking, where we have teachers who are teleworking, and where we're getting the copies of the information to our laptops in advance of the closed session. So at that point, it has been sent to us and we have it. We just need to have policies in place that hold board members accountable for the confidentiality of those notes or information. But if we're sending it to us in advance, I am going to read it. I'm going to make notes on it, and I'm going to be held responsible for keeping those notes until the closed session. And if we have that level of trust for me to do it until the closed session, I don't know what really changes after. I think it's just a matter of accountability and instead of putting a blanket policy, because we are given the information in our homes on our shared drives. And so maybe a kind of in between would be to keep notes in a designated shared drive so that the board members can access them when they feel like they need to. And they could be accessible to Cami or whoever might need to as well. I do kind of agree that when we have discipline hearings, if it's a student who has been before us before, and we get the information in advance again, it might be helpful to be able to look at our own notes in advance when we get the other information in advance. And so I think it's worth additional thought. That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any colleagues who would like to share an alternate perspective or respond to what they heard from Mrs. Owens? Mrs. Franklin, I'm sorry. Well, I'm the facilitator, so I'm not sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. So again, I apologize because I'm new to, and I haven't actually been in a disciplinary committee meeting yet. So with that being said, are we able to make notes just on our, like a Word document that is in our computer, our shared drive, so it's not something that's necessarily just loose and amok? I'm sorry?
It's a PDF.
No. As we're writing our own personal notes, because is that not what we're talking about? We're talking about the notes that we ourselves write about a student or disciplinary
It's
action.
usually the practice of Mr. McGee's office to give you a hard copy on your dais when you're up here, but you can drop them down electronically. So if you got electronically, it would be a PDF. If you have the Adobe ready, you could write on that. I guess you can convert it to Word. So you do have the ability to do it electronically. Usually you have a hard copy on the dais for you also.
So, but what I think what Ms. Owens is referring to is that she is going to make notes prior to the meeting. And if that's the case, then I do kind of agree with her in the sense that if we have access to it, we're able to write notes before the meeting. How do we then, or what is the difference between having that available before the meeting, writing the notes, and then are we supposed to, because according to how I'm interpreting the bylaws, then at that point, we have to give those notes to the clerk to hold in a separate, I guess, file or something like that, as opposed to just having it on our laptop. So I guess I do agree in the sense that if we're going to have the information before we're already making notes, I guess there just has to be further clarification about what the expectation is once we make the notes, I guess. Because really, if the information is there, that's not so confidential that we have to maybe hand that in because it's already provided to us. But in the sense that once we make the notes, that's what you want us to protect and keep confidential.
Can I just say Mrs. Linetti, I think it's important to remind the viewing public that our discipline hearings are recorded. And so if I truly believe that if you need to go back to revisit something, if a child is going to come before you and you need a refresher, a copy of that can be given to you, first of all. And it is very, as a parent, I would be appalled knowing that a school board member keeps records of my child in a notebook that could be left in a car. Sometimes birthdays are written down, other information that actually identifies a student is written down. That could be stolen, the car, I mean, anything. It's just, we keep cumulative records in a fire safe room, and we have to check them out as teachers, or we had to check them out, and there's so much more to this confidentiality piece. We don't need, we're going to have an audit committee meeting next week, and if we have a closed session and we jot down stuff, the auditor takes our notes and she shreds them before we leave the room. There's this whole misconception, or it's ridiculous to say that we need a notebook to go back when information is readily available to us, and we don't have to assume responsibility of someone else's private information, especially on the heels of our attorney telling us the federal laws and implications that surround this. And so it's for me, it's a protection of the people that we are making decisions for, those little guys, and I think it's just highly inappropriate.
And I'm sorry, I do want to apologize for taking time on this because I haven't had any experience on these kind of committees before, and I'm expected to make a vote on this tonight. So I just want to understand and make sure I have clarification. So thank you.
Can I say something too? In these discipline committees, you have the student and one of their parents, and sometimes the whole family member or friends. There's going to be more said that's even more personal that is not on the notes or the hard copy. So a lot more personal information is shared. And those are the kind of notes that we might be taking. So that's an addition to just information. You'll see once you're in there because there's a lot of personal information that won't be on, that they want to share. So that often happens as well.
Please add Ms. Hughes to the queue.
Go ahead, Mrs. Hughes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that Miss Riggs just said that. She just expressed the exact reason why you're going to want to keep your personal notes, because there are times in a discipline committee where a student needs to come back 6 months, a year from now, whatever amount of time you set. And those impressions and those things that you said actually add a lot more texture to the conversation than just the notes from the school. There may be reasons that you're going to look later on to be more lenient or look for extra effort or whatever it is. But your impressions and things that are said really are just so much more detailed than what is in that hard copy you get from school. So thank you. That's exactly why you should keep them.
I'd just like to just bring, Ms. Franklin, you bring up a good point. You have to vote on this, and you have to know why. And I've been chair with the discipline committee for a while. And what I found that is interesting, if a name come out that looks familiar to me, I call the department, who is the gentleman that's over that department. Any student that I think I'm familiarized with, he can always go back and give me what we did, what we said, and why we moved on it. And he's very explicit about what we did and why we did it. He keeps very good notes. He is reminded why we did what we did. And he's very good at bringing and jogging our memory while we were doing a thing. We have Attorney Linetti in the room. If not, two of her co-workers come in and they verbatimly give us the information on what we did, and that I don't care how far ago it was. I remember asking and requesting some information from Mr. McGee about something that we had did with discipline, and he gave me the exact information that I wanted to jog my memory. So we do have good protocol without having to keep our notes. Now, what really concerned me is it is about very vulnerable people that we are dealing with, and they're students. And students have no way of protecting themselves from us if we just inadvertently notes get lost or something get out by mistake. We are human. We will make mistakes. But I find that it's very important. Yes, I worked with the military before. I worked with other corporations that had policies in places. I worked with the military where I was a data information. When you went in, they checked you. When you came out, they checked you as well. You can carry anything in or bring anything out. So it's different levels to military protocol as well as different levels to screening as well. I was part of a reading program at our civic center. I have had several background checks, several, but Parks and Recreation said that was that background check. We're going to do our own background check. So every department, every entity has its own manner of doing things, and I think that we should be really careful about the confidentiality of our students, our parents, because when they come here sometimes, they actually spill their most vulnerable, they're vulnerable to us because they're trying to show their emotion and emotions come out. So I just want to verify that about the discipline hearing and how we carry that out. Thank you.
And Ms. Anderson has her hand raised.
Okay, another time check. One thing looking at the session, folks, that I see, we can certainly defer the status of new committees and VSBA fall conference feedback to a future workshop, and those who were involved in that were aware that that was a possibility. So that buys us some extra time, but I want to honor to the extent possible the parliamentary portion as well as the strategic plan updates to start at 2:10. So with that, Dr. Vaneke.
Thank you. I'd like to move forward unless, Mrs. Anderson, there's a unique contribution you want to make to the conversation.
Yes, I would like to, I'd just like to reiterate, Mrs. Melnick pointed out and Mrs. Felton both pointed out that the discipline committee meetings in particular are, if you need to keep notes on that, those are recorded. All the discipline committee meetings are recorded. So if you need to go back to review on a student who's going to come back to you, all you have to do is get in touch with Mike McGee. He will provide those notes.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson.
The first discipline committee meeting, and so there's no reason whatsoever for anyone to walk out of that and say, I have to keep my notes because I might have to come back and talk about this student in 6 months or a year. So that particular reason
We need for Dr. Baneke to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we've talked about suggested the reservations that emerged from the group based on our polling. Now, I'd like to move on to the polling that was a rating of 2, which says I have suggested revisions, and I think that was Mrs. Hughes. Mrs. Hughes, I was wondering if you could summarize for us some of this, why this vote and what your suggestions, revisions are.
I probably voiced most of them by now. I do think that having a protocol manual for things that we do during meetings to keep order and keep a flow is a good thing. But this whole thing kind of smacks of micromanagement of people, of board members acting where they should be able to be autonomous. I mean, suggesting that people really should copy everybody, that's not even something you should suggest unless it's on behalf of me. That's fine. I think you should, but otherwise send it how you want to send it. I mean, I think that we should be broadcasting non-agenda speakers. If it's school board business, it's school board business. There's nothing to hide. Just put it out there. As far as keeping notes, I'm going to keep my notes. I'm not going to leave them in my car. I have a lot of notes based on my job that are things that I need to keep confidential. And I think Ms. Owens made a great point. You trust us to email it to us. You trust us to make notes ahead of time. But as soon as the meeting's over, the trust has ended, that doesn't even make any sense. I think that we're all adults and we all understand what we need to do to keep things confidential. If you can point to some specific cases where board members have let this kind of sensitive information get out, you might actually have a case, but I've not even heard of that happening. So this is just preemptive, and it just smacks of micromanagement. We're all educated adults. I think we all make judgment calls. As far as if somebody gets 11 different emails with 11 different opinions, I don't think there's anybody that would be shocked that we disagree on things. Anybody who is emailing probably watches school board meetings and sees enough discussion to know that we are not all of the same mind on many issues, that we have many different opinions. And we get emails and we see posts on Facebook where only 2 people responded, only 1 person responded. They like getting those responses. So I don't see where that's a problem.
Mrs. Hughes, what I'm hearing is I'm not hearing that there are additional revisions that you're suggesting. Many of them fall into some of the reservations or things that will be further discussed in considering some of the bylaws later today. I'm I want to wrap up our time together and thank you. I'm hoping this provided information for the governance committee to help inform if there are additional changes that you feel are made necessary for your protocol manual. I think it's been a good conversation, and particularly Mrs. Franklin has thanked you already for the conversation around the discipline committees and what that means as a new board member, helping her understand from your perspective what that looks like. Are there any additional comments before we wrap up our time together? Anything else, Mrs. Rye, that you want to pose?
Other than that, we will add this as an agenda item to the next governance committee meeting to weigh the additional feedback. And I thank Mrs. Anderson and Mrs. Riggs, who, as I noted earlier, took the lead on this, representing the committee. And thank you, Dr. Bannicky, for helping us to synthesize where we're at with this now.
Yep. And I'll be more than happy to type up my notes from, what
I
the
mean,
little I've gathered here. I'm sure you all have captured it as well.
I'm heartened to see that the majority of members believe in concept with, the rationale for protocols that I stated up front. But we certainly, I think we've already acknowledged we can work on some of these issues at the committee level and then collectively as a board. Okay. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Let me just say one thing.
Yes.
The rest of it is just, but there is something on one of the pages in the appendix, and that is, you'll see first and third, regular meeting it's Appendix E, page 32, number 20. Just fix that because it wasn't fixed. If in case you go back and look some more, that should say the second and fourth. It was fixed in one of them, but in this one we missed it. The others are just typographical things, okay? But just to make sure you aren't confused there, okay?
Right, some
Thank you.
typos in the committee procedures
Right.
appendix, it's C, okay. Okay, we are at the point of a short break, and we will reconvene at 1:25 and move on to the parliamentary session of the retreat. So a 10-minute break. Thank you.